Uh, in this lecture on religious language or language, depending on how you put it, in the philosophy of religion, language, I want to tell you that language is a tool of communication. For human beings, language is listens to and its nature, functions and limitations are of great importance. I mean, language is a very critical tool for listening, and the functions and the limitations are of great importance. But again, we can also tell you something. Language is the vehicle of culture. So how can you transmit culture? Through language. So language is very, very important. It is important to theologians, it's important to psychologists, it's important to historians, to everyone. However, when you use words in ordinary language and apply to religious phenomenon, the actual meaning may change. For example, when we call God Father or King, the meaning is different from when we call our parent Father and our ruler King. Now, religious language is described as cosmology, historical narrative, myth or moral discourse, as well as blessing and cursing, confessing and adoring. It crucially involves metaphor, symbol, analogy, parable, and paradox. In other words, you not hear any religious language without parables, without using even what we call analogy, symbols, metaphors, parables, paradoxes, another stylistic devices in language. You not fail to hear all that. You are doing religion, but religious language will be more figurative and use those metaphorical language, those symbolic, those analogical. You can remember St. Augustine comparing the Trinity to a delta. Of course, it couldn't work out well. Of course, a great man, great philosopher, I may not measure to that. And he would describe delta, the Trinity as a delta, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. But if you look at River Nile or River Tana, these deltas, you see they are not isosceles triangle with 60 degrees each to make isosceles triangle, 60, 60, 60, then 180. And delta has no clear formulation. God made it without necessarily making it an isosceles triangle as it should be for describing Trinity, the oneness, and co-equal, co-eternal, all those jargons you may use in theological language. Now, given the diversity of religious language, there can be no single way of confirming or rebuting its many and complex claims. Now, let's look at analogical language. Now, religious language is analogical. Although it employs ordinary words, the deeper the meaning of the same words changes in the religious context. The change of meaning is, however, not total, but analogical. There is partial likeness or agreement, but the meanings belong to different forms or spheres. Now, it was Saint Thomas Aquinas, the Roman Catholic theologian of the 12th century, who developed the idea of analogy in religious language. He calls it analogical predication. And this means that when a word such as good is applied both to a created being and to God, it is not being used unequivocally. That is exactly the same meaning. Neither is it used equivocally. That is completely different and unrelated meaning. but is used analogically. A good example is when we talk of a faithful dog or a person who is faithful. We use the same word because there is a similarity between a certain quality exhibited in the behavior of the dog and the steadfast voluntary adherence to a person or a cause that we call faithfulness in a human being. Due to this similarity, we are not using the word faithful equivocally, that is, with totally different senses. On the other hand, it is important to realize that there is an immense difference in quality between a dog's and a man's attitudes. Of course, one is an animal, the other one is a human being. The one is indefinitely superior to the other in respect of responsible, self-conscious, deliberating, and the relating of attitudes to moral purposes and ends. And due to this difference, we are not using the word faithful unequivocally, but analogically. Now, when we say that God is God, God is God, when we say God is God, we are simply saying that there is a quality of the infinitely perfect being, that is God, that corresponds to what in our own human level we can call goodness. The doctrine of analogy does not intend to spell out the concrete character of God's perfection, but only indicates the relationship between the different meaning of a word when it is applied both to human beings and to God. To sum it all, we can say that St. Thomas indicates that religion often uses words in somewhat the same in somewhat the same and somewhat different senses from their secular usage, that is, in an analogical way. Now, coming to very quickly to symbolic language or language, religious language is symbolic. In religious history, especially the faith Christian tradition, we see and the vast signs and symbols. One of the contributors in this area of religious language is our friend Paul Tillich. I say our friend because Paul Tillich, this Western scholar, has been described as a friend of Africa by most African scholars by the way he explicates and conducts his scholarly discourses. Paul Tillich speaks of the doctrine of symbolic nature of religious language. According to Tillich, a sign signifies and participates in that to which it points. For the symbols to exist, there has to be some kind of sensorial quality. Some prior knowledge then becomes an essential instrument for expressing what cannot be said. For example, the Kenyan flag is a symbol of the nation with its green color representing the land. The red reminding us that we shed blood to become independent nation, especially during the Mau Mau times when people, guerrillas, waged war through the Kenyan forest. Of course, the red is a reminder of the blood that was shed when fighting for the independence. And the black in the color of the is the color of the people. It represents the color of the people in the Kenyan flag. And the white strips is for peace. Now, the flag then is our symbol, expressing all this reality. Paul Tillich says that the flag as a symbol participates in the power and dignity of the nation it represents. Now, a symbol opens up levels of reality which otherwise are closed to use. They unlock dimensions and elements of our soul corresponding to the new aspect of the world it reviews. So religious faith expresses itself in symbolic language. That is the bottom line. Now, on symbolic language or language, Landau is a scholar Landau, writing many years ago in 1958, pointed out that religious symbols have fourfold functions. Number one, they arouse emotions and stir up people to action, to take action, to swim or into action, or to swim into action. For instance, God is love, therefore you must love one another. They also strengthen people's practical commitment to what they believe to be right, or some can even decide to die for their faith. For instance, youth in Islamic religion, you can see some can even die for it as mujahideen. Second, they stimulate corporate action and thus bind a community together through a common response to these signs or symbols. Compare all those symbols that are or those signposts that are warned by red light at the street corner. Of course, when you are passing, you find a red light. You know, it has a very strong communication. Thus, driving signs help to keep order on the way, as some of them are mandatory signs. Okay? But when it comes to religion, a red sign, of course, may have other meanings. That they are able to communicate qualities of experience that cannot be expressed by the literal use of the language. For instance, anthropomorphic language is employed, and the anthropomorphic language is all about using the names of human beings to describe God. Like in African theological perspective, they would prefer to talk of God as not just a father. African women theologians would want to talk about God as a mother. They would also want to use the Ghanaian community called Ga of Ghana, who talk of Atanya Nyonmo, meaning God is father, mother, God. So God is not just father, but father, mother, God. Okay, not an inclusive one, not the one where God is just father, and therefore that concern has been raised by, especially by African women theologians, that yes, we use anthropomorphic language, but it has to be inclusive. There are other times when theologians call Christ the elder brother, Monawamberi, and they say what happens when a firstborn dies. Of course, you inherit the shirt, you inherit the dress, all that. So we can know God by looking at God through anthropomorphic language, using human ones. It is very hard to tell people about God in a very remote language. If you use a very remote language, detached from people whom you are communicating to, you may end up not, at the end of the day, you may end up not communicating, and the people may not understand what you are saying. But if you communicate, use anthropomorphic language, very well, that will be easy for them to understand. But of course, when we think of anthropomorphic language, we also have so many issues to contend with. For example, when you say God is a father or Jesus is a father, now how can God be a father when somebody has a very wayward father who mistreats them? Or God is a mother who is irresponsible. But because God is perfect, that is the challenge. Now, we normally say every philosophical statement has its own defect. In other words, there's nothing, no philosophy is complete without certain areas where there are gray hairs. There are certain areas that may be poked, and we can see there's an issue about it. But all the same, anthropomorphic language is a language of religion. The last point. Fourth, both sign and symbol, both sign and symbol evoke and serve to foster and clarify the human experience of an aspect of the world that can be called the order of splendor. To that end, scholar Lador raises the question, what is the work of a prophet? Of course, he argues the effect changes on our world. They teach humans to see what life in our world is and what it might be. They teach humans to discern what nature can make out of natural conditions. They open our hearts to the new qualities in that world. Besides John Hick, we can discuss Braidwater's theory on the character of religious language as shown below, that it serves an ethical function. For example, when Jews, Christians claim that God is love, Love, they must follow agapeistic way of life, which is practicing love of God. Therefore, believers are meant to live according to the command of God. You must love one another as God has loved them. He stresses further that ethical statement expresses the speaker's adherence to a certain policy of action. They express the intention of the asserter to act in a particular sort of way, specified in the assertion to declare that he resolves to the best of his ability to do so and so. Sherrill, writing sometimes in 1983, contended that the characteristics of the symbol are as follows. There is a long list of about 11 characteristics, and we can try to summarize them. Number one, as said earlier, a symbol is a sign pointing beyond itself to something which it presents because it is associated with it or participating in it. It is that which the symbol represents and cannot be grasped by the ordinary use of the senses. Symbol represents a meaning which it would be difficult or impossible to communicate and in non-symbolic terms. A symbol can refer or refers ultimately to that which cannot be expressed in the ordinary terms of time and space. A symbol is not arbitrary and organically related to which it refers, for symbols are freely drawn from the common life. Number 6, symbols are concrete. This means, among other things, that a symbol furnishes specific details which can be apprehended by the senses, and yet at the same time it stimulates the mind to grasp the meaning which the symbol itself alone fully expresses. Number 7, a symbol participates in that to which it refers. If that to which it refers has power in it, the symbol too has the power in it. Number 8, a symbol does not fully contain that to which it points. This means that the symbol is not identical with that to which it refers. A symbol, it stands for that to which it refers. It does not therefore contain all that reality, but participates in it. Number 9, although a symbol has power, it may not influence those outside it unless they participate in the symbol, if the symbol is to yield up itself. Number 10, a symbol serves to communicate meaning, yet we for our art and to the meaning which the symbol has by our own act of responding to it. So in other words, if we don't respond to it, it may not have that meaning. Number 11, and the last point that was raised by scholar Sherrill, is that a comparison between a definition and a symbol is instructive. A symbol, on the other hand, sets the mind soaring out into unbounded area. It stimulates the mind to do its own work of recognizing the meaning in the symbol and encourages the quest for further meaning. Having heard about a symbol, what is now the difference between a sign and a symbol? Yeah, what is the difference between a sign and a symbol? Of course, that could have been covered much earlier in another unit, but let us examine the differences between a sign and a symbol. Scholar Paul Tillich distinguishes between sign and symbol. Both point to something else beyond themselves, but a sign signifies that to which it points. For example, the red light at the street corner signifies that drivers are ordered to halt. It is a mandatory sign, and it must be adhered to. A symbol participates in that which it points. And that's why I reminded you about the Kenyan flag, what it has. And I said that all these things must be understood. So, in conclusion, both signs and symbols are means of communication. We use analog means signs, symbols. However, a sign in a broader sense is anything which serves as a means of communication. For example, a sign may be a mark of some kind, such as an arrow pointing in a certain direction. It may be a word, a gesture, and also a mathematical figure, plus, minus, or the sign of the cross, or such like things. A sign also stands for something else, and thus points beyond itself. In Russia, the icon stands for the presence of Jesus. This icon shown somewhere there. Lastly, a symbol is a sign representing something else to which it points. It represents that to which it points or it participates in. In the Bible, a symbol has far greatest importance, especially in revelation and encounter with God. In revelation, symbols make up a language through which God discloses himself to humanity. Like number 7, we don't like it, but in some communities in Africa. But in the Bible, number 7 symbolizes greatness, completeness. You know, the 7 seals, 7 lamps. Even in the book of Daniel, the book of Revelation, 7 is a language of God's power. But you see, when you come to number 7, in some communities, people don't like it. Just like some people in the West don't like number 13. It's symbolizing, says bad omen. So also symbols differ when people are interpreting or theologizing and interpreting God or discourses about God in their respective communities. So we must be cautious that certain symbols appearing in certain community may not necessarily follow the same way in another one. So furthermore, biblical symbols by their own nature are evocative, signed to draw forth a response of some kind, and this in turn can set up an interaction which is actually a two-way communication. It is a dialogue of two-way communication in which humans participate in the symbols by their own nature, and they are therefore evocative, designed to draw forth a respondence of some kind, or a response of some kind, and this in turn can set up an interaction which is actually a two-way communication. It is therefore a dialogue of two-way communication in which humans participate in the symbol and in which it may be then counter with God. So that is the end of the lesson now. We can only entertain questions now. Thank you.